Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you all had a nice lunch on this beautiful day. In the next hours, we have a few talks about how developers like you can create great games, connect and scale to billions of users with Google. My name is Guy, and I'm a partner development manager with the Google Play team from Southeast Asia. I'm based in Singapore. And also I have my colleague Daniel, who will join me shortly as well. In these first sessions, we'll share with you how game developers can achieve success in emerging markets and build great business there. We'll cover a few things in this talk. First, we'll share with you opportunities and challenges that emerging markets represent. Then we'll share with you 3 key strategies for achieving success in these markets. We also share with you resources that you can take away to help you achieve that goals. The reason we want to talk to you about emerging markets because we know it is a big business opportunities for game developers. However, these markets may not be as familiar to many of you who may have been focused a bit more on developed markets like the US market, Europe, Japan, and Korea. But first, let's talk about what do we mean by emerging markets. Emerging markets are countries and regions that are in growth stage, and they share some common characteristics. These markets have large and fast-growing smartphone user base. Income level of users in these markets are growing rapidly, although they may be lower in developed market, typically maybe a quarter to a third. In these markets, we also see much higher proportion of entry or mid-level devices with lower specs. Credit card ownership and usage in these markets are also lower. Geographically, emerging markets cover a very large area and include key markets like India, Southeast Asia, Latin America, Middle East, and North Africa. As I mentioned, emerging markets have a lot of smartphone users and it's growing rapidly. Of the 4 billion forecasted Android devices that's projected to be in the markets over the next few years, many of them are already in emerging markets. 2/3 of Android devices sold today are already in emerging markets, and this represents a huge opportunity for developers to tap into a very large user base. And the good news is it's not just the number of smartphone users in these markets. We're seeing very strong momentum in in-app purchases and monetization in these markets as well. Today, among the top 20 grossing markets on Google Play, 7 of them are emerging markets. Consumer spending in these markets also growing rapidly. They have doubled in the past 2 years and continue to grow rapidly also. Now, I hope that you are excited about the opportunities in emerging markets. And we would like to share with you 3 key strategies for helping you to become successful in these regions. First, you should consider optimizing your games for entry and mid-level smartphones in emerging markets. 2, consider localizing and culturalizing your games for users in these markets where English may not be the first language. And 3, consider adjusting price points for your games so that they are more affordable for users in these markets. We'll go through each of these in more details, and I'll start with optimizing your games for smartphones in emerging markets. In emerging markets, users really care about the app size. This is often because entry-level phones in emerging markets come with lower storage, or sometimes data connectivity is just expensive, so it's costly for users in these markets to download apps. And we've seen this translate to user concerns. In Indonesia, half of the users have told us in a survey that they really want to know how much data an app will use or how much space an app would take on their phone. In Brazil, we have heard many users mention that they don't download apps or they don't end up purchasing premium games because they run out of space on their phones. And it's not just user concerns. We've seen this translate to metrics that impact developer performance. In emerging markets, we've seen that larger apps result in lower download success rates. For every 10 megabyte increase in APK size, developers sees 1.5% drop in app install conversion. So let's say if your game is 60 megabytes larger than a similar games, which at first glance doesn't seem like a lot, but you could actually see up to 10 percentage point lower install conversion in emerging markets. That translates to a lot of install that you're losing. Therefore, it's important to keep your app size light for emerging markets. And it's not just about optimizing the app size as well. It's also important in emerging markets to optimize the game performance once the user have downloaded the app onto the device. This is because entry-level devices in emerging markets often don't have a lot of memory. We have seen that nearly 1 in 2 devices in emerging markets have RAM less than 2 gigabytes. So if your game is memory intensive, this could lead to crashes, poor rendering, and poor user experience for users in these markets. We're seeing many developers putting in efforts to optimize their games for emerging markets. And Garena Free Fire is one great example. Free Fire is a popular battle royale game, but it comes in a size that's just under 600 megabytes, while some of the other games in this genre is over 1 gigabyte. The games also offer Google Play Instant, where users can immediately play and experience the game without having to download and install the APK. The game is also optimized to support over 12,000 devices on a Play device catalog. And as a result of all these efforts, the game is able to reach many, many users in emerging markets. It has reached over 40 million peak daily active user. And the game has also gone on to become the #1 grossing game in many emerging markets like Brazil, Indonesia, and Thailand. I hope I've convinced you of the importance of optimizing your games for emerging markets. And here are some tips and tools that can help you with that. First, try to reduce your APK and app size. And you can use Android app bundles that was mentioned earlier today, as well as APK Analyzer in Android Studio. Secondly, consider optimizing the performance for devices with lower RAM. Our team has published a Building for Billions guidelines to help you do just that, and we'll share with you the link to that at the end of the presentation. Next, consider publishing Google Play Instant for your game. Again, this lets users try and experience your game without having to download and install the APK. And if you develop in Unity, there's a Unity plugin to help you with that. Finally, check to make sure how widely your game is supported across various devices in emerging markets. And you can use Device Catalog in the Play console to help you with that. Next, Daniel will share with you 2 other key strategies to help you become successful in emerging markets.
Hello, everyone. Our second strategy is related to localization and culturalization of your games for emerging markets. Localization is really, really important for these markets, and the reason for that is that the English proficiency is really low. So it isn't a surprise that when we check the top 20 grossing titles in these regions, the vast majority of them are localized not only on its store listings, but specifically in-game. K-Lab saw a very positive impact from the localization they did of Captain Tsubasa to Arabic. They released the localized version during Ramadan and the World Cup of 2018, and as a culturalization effort, they added Saudi Arabia players to that. As a result, they saw that the installs increased 7-fold, and the current revenues that they see from Arabic-speaking countries exceeds the ones from English-speaking countries. Another aspect to take in mind is the packaging of your game for emerging markets. And by packaging, I mean the store listings. They need to be adapted to the local preferences. Supercell does a great job by adapting their screenshots to the cultural tastes of each country. Here you can see the difference between the Brazilian one versus the Japanese one. So, some tips for localizing. adapt your packaging. And in order to do this, we provide you the store listing experiment tool where you can try different configurations of your store listing, and also the country targeting tool so you can have different store listing for each country. Also, try to understand cultural references and special dates. This will generate several interesting sites so you can create custom events, custom content, and special sales that are tailored to each market. Also, each country has its preferred marketing channels and social networks that provide more traction there. So be sure to understand the digital landscape, and working with some digital agencies there might speed up your learning curve. And our last strategy relates to adjusting your price point for emerging markets. As different countries have different levels of income per capita, and consequently different levels of purchasing power, some successful products and services already adapt their price points to the local realities. And in emerging markets, there is usually less disposable income for entertainment products, so the users there might face some interesting decisions. Shall I buy some gems, or shall I buy 1 month of a streaming video service? Shall I buy a nice burger combo or this custom product within a game? So here we would like to provide you with some of the most common price points for these goods, specifically for Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, and Indonesia. And it isn't a surprise that when we check it, that the price points that drive the majority of the revenue in emerging markets, they are more friendly to the local population. So there is effectively a trade-off between the average revenue per paying user for a broader buyer base. And when we compare the price points that generate half of the revenue in emerging markets, they are usually in a range of 10 to 25% of the price points that generate half of the revenue on developed markets. IGG has a very interesting case where they applied more friendly pricing for Brazil. So in general, they charged $2 for the starter pack, but specifically for Brazil, they started pricing at 99 cents. And with this, they got 122% growth in consumer spend in country. Garena Free Fire as well offered different price points depending on the emerging market that they are. So the price points can range from 10 to 20% of the prices that they usually charge on developed markets, and this doubled their buyer penetration. As some general tips, it's important to understand what is the acceptable price points for some emerging markets. Recall that as people have less disposable income, they will be always comparing their entertainment options. So use A/B testing to try to find your optimum pricing for each country. It's worth to remember that Google Play allows you to charge prices that are below $1 in 17 countries, and the majority of these countries are on emerging markets. So this can broaden up your price range that can be tested through A/B testing. Also avoid biases. In emerging markets as well, we do have wealthy people, and there is a broad range of users that you can monetize. So to find the right mix of your right revenue mix between ads, IAP, and subscription. Thank you for your attention today, and here are some links that you might find useful, respectively the Building for Billions website, more information about Android Vitals, and the link for the translation services that you might find within Play Console. And next, I'd like to introduce you to Vijay, who will share some updates on how to build AR games. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here at GDC. I'm Vijay Shankar, and I lead product for ARCore. Today, I want to talk about how ARCore can help you build more compelling gaming experiences. But first, let's start with this simple question, like why even build an AR game? I believe the answer, both from a gaming and an overall computing perspective, is that this gets users a more engaging experience when the digital and the physical worlds intersect. This, if you're able to accomplish the intersection of the digital and the physical world, opens the door for more engaging experiences that I think are going to be a lot more realistic, a lot more intuitive for users to play, and more importantly, a lot more fun. Speaking of fun, if you look at the history of gaming, predominantly, like games and the magic that's come from games has been the ability to pull users from the real world into the digital one. But now with augmented reality, you can actually flip that. You can bring the imagination and the fantasy right to the users in their own physical space. We think that's extremely powerful. As I'm sure you all would agree, like that's a lot easier said than done. So we've been giving a lot of thought into what are the key ingredients required from a tech enablement perspective to make compelling gaming experiences in AR. And we think there are three underlying ones. Number one is the game and the tech needs to be perceptive. What does this mean? In order to augment reality, you need to be able to have your device understand the places, object, and people around you. And number two is immersion. For something to be immersive, like the virtual objects in your gaming experience need to blend seamlessly into the user's environment. This is what makes your gaming experience more realistic. And three, which we think is equally important, is all AR experiences need to be available across devices and platforms, be it iOS or Android. If you look at the real world, like building perceptive, immersive, and accessible experiences is fairly straightforward. We don't even think much about it because it's intuitive and natural. But for the camera in our mobile devices, it's not so much. And that's the reason we built ARCore. We want to give you simple yet powerful tools to help connect the physical and the digital world. Now let's actually dig into some of these tools and how they can enable you to build compelling experiences. So let's first start with perception. Like we had discussed, there are three underlying areas that we need to enable for perception. The ability for the device to understand places, objects, and then people. Everything starts with places and environmental understanding with AR. With ARCore, out of the box, you get the ability to understand the physical structure of the environment, the ability to detect horizontal, vertical, and angular surfaces. So may it be a wall, the ground, or a table, we have you covered in terms of our ability to find a plane. And over the last year, since we announced environmental understanding in ARCore, we have made significant progress in terms of how the underlying tech works. We have put a lot of attention into looking at what are the things about this that actually move user engagement and retention. And we have significantly improved some of those core metrics. These could be things such as the probability of finding planes, or the time it takes for your user to find that first plane to create that aha moment. So we are super excited to see like how these changes are going to help you build more compelling games. Let's now talk about objects. One example is the Augmented Images API. This helps you track and recognize 2D images and then be able to like kick off immersive 3D experiences off of them. And all we need from you is to give us a database of the images and the associated 3D content you want to trigger. It's that simple. And this unlocks the ability for you to create immersive experiences around the user by tapping into everyday things. It could be a poster or a cereal box. So we spoke about places and objects. Let's talk about faces in people, like which are a lot more complex. Even the smallest of movements and changes, like the arch of an eyebrow, can drastically change the meaning and the expression someone is trying to convey. And which is why we are super excited about the Augmented Faces API that we launched last month. It is a high-quality 468-point 3D mesh that can detect even the minutest of actions that users take, and then trigger powerful experiences off of them. we're really excited to see some of the experiences you can build with the Augmented Faces API. These were some examples of the perceptive capabilities in ARCore. Let's now talk about immersion. As we had discussed earlier, for something to feel like it's actually with you, this could be a gaming element or a character. For it to actually feel real, it needs to move and react to the real-world environment, just like you and I or a real object would. And that is a really hard problem. I want to talk about a couple of things that ARCore does to make that happen seamlessly. The first one is motion tracking. By combining the data from the camera and the IMU, we are able to provide your device the capability to have both position and orientation and track itself with respect to the rest of the real world. And this actually enables your camera and your device to perform and work like your own eyes. And again, this is one area where we have made significant improvements since we launched this last year. And the second one I want to talk about with immersion is lighting. We need to really get lighting right, or it breaks the illusion. The virtual content in your gaming experiences need to react to the same way to changes in real-world lighting like real objects would. And that's a hard problem. And you get that out of the box with ARCore. So we spoke about some of the perceptive and immersive capabilities. I now want to talk about how ARCore is making this more accessible and why that's equally important. I'm sure we all would agree, gaming is inherently more fun with your friends. And especially when we are trying to connect the digital and the physical worlds, being able to share these gaming experiences in the real world with people you like is extremely crucial. And that's exactly what Cloud Anchors does. This lets you have shared gaming experiences no matter the device that your friends use. It works on iOS and Android. And we think this is extremely powerful to scale gaming experiences and for people to get the most out of it. This is a fundamentally hard technical problem. And the thing that we have done again with ARCore is we've completely abstracted that so that you as developers don't have to worry about creating the anchor or hosting the anchors or even resolving the anchors. And it's super straightforward for you to enable these shared multiplayer experiences within your gaming sessions. The other piece of feedback that we had gotten over the last year is building these high-quality interactions is actually extremely hard, right? This is a new concept, and it's fairly complex. So one of the things that we heard from developers is we would like to not spend as much time worrying about these interactions, but spend more time on what we do best, which is building the gaming experience itself. And this is why we spent a lot of time thinking through these interactions, and we launched the AR Elements Design Guidelines app to make this extremely simple for you to tap into. So this app is a collection of the underlying UX primitives and principles that you would need to build all these high-quality AR interactions. For example, this could be, how do you help users understand motion tracking and help them find their first plane in an engaging way? Or how do you make this simple and interesting for your users to start a shared multiplayer session? So we have thought through all those little details based on our experience at Google building first-party AR experiences and speaking with a lot of developers who work on AR experiences overall. So we're really excited to share this with you, and we would love to hear your feedback on what more you would like to see around these design guidelines. So you can get this app today on the Play Store, or you can also get it as part of the Unity SDK. The other thing I want to call out, continuing on the theme of accessibility, is ARCore is available with our SDKs on Unity, Unreal, Android, and iOS, like we had spoken about. We want to make it super easy for you to work on the platform of your choice and make it super simple for you to get started. Today, ARCore is available on over 250 million devices, and that number continues to grow as we speak. I just want to bring this back together with a couple of examples to illustrate what we have been talking about. The first two here, Jurassic World Alive and Walking Dead, are examples where they combine the power of ARCore and the Google Maps platform to build amazing content and gaming experiences to the real world. The other one is one of my personal favorites from Tender Claws, which is about how do you use players' facial expressions to control the gameplay and use the emotions and expressions to control virtual objects within the game. And while you're at GDC this week, I would highly encourage you to go check out the ARCore booth, where we have an escape the room AR demo that is super compelling and gives you a flavor for what magic happens when you connect the digital and the physical world. And we have everything you need to get started, from documentation to code labs. So we'd encourage you to go to developers.google.com/AR to start building your AR game today. And I'll finally end on this note. Historically, if you have looked at every new emerging technology, you as game developers have been at the forefront of pushing the tech forward. And we think it's going to be the same with AR. So we on the ARCore team are really excited to see what are the compelling experiences that you're going to build with ARCore. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Lisa Takehana, and I'm a game designer at Google. And today, I'm going to be talking about a different kind of game that you can play on your mobile devices, and it's a fairly new industry still, and that's voice games. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about designing voice games for the Google Assistant platform. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to be talking about why we think voice games are on the rise and the potential we see in this market. And then we're going to be sharing a couple games that we built at Google. And lastly, we want to share a lot of the learnings that we went through when we were designing these games. Again, it's a fairly new industry, and there's still a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of trial and error when we were developing these games. Let me introduce you to the Google Assistant, which is Google's virtual helper controlled by your voice. The devices you see here have the Google Assistant built in, which means it has a microphone for voice input and also a speaker for the devices to respond. These devices are collectively known in the industry as smart speakers. So in 2016, it began with the Google Home, which is the Google Assistant with the speaker only, but then it expanded to other types of hardware depending on different user needs. So for example, we have the Google Home Mini, which is a smaller version of the Google Home, and this one has a better price point. And then we also have the Google Home Max, which is a larger version with better speakers. Last year, we also introduced the Google Home Hub, which is the Google Assistant with a visual display built in, but still powered by your voice. And as with any new media technology, it takes some time for users to get used to them. Here's a graph showing adoption rates of all the different types of new media that came out. So for example, we have cable TV, smartphones, and internet over the past half a century. And then you can see on the bottom right here, those are smart speakers. And you can still see that it's in pretty early stages in terms of user adoption. And what are these users doing with these smart speakers? Well, based on this research by Adobe, we know that most users are using them for things like media, so maybe listening to music or listening to a podcast or the news, but we also know that they're using it for things like productivity. So those are going to be things like checking your calendar, asking for the weather. But we also know that there's a fairly large user base of people who are asking for fun things. So for example, you can ask the Google Assistant what its favorite color is, what kind of food it likes to eat, what kind of animal it likes, And we also have games available on the Google Assistant that you can play. And these are really great platforms for multiplayer because they're designed to be placed in communal areas in a home. So this is a really great device that you can put in, let's say, a living room or a kitchen. So this is a really great multiplayer platform for family game night, or if you want to play games with your friends and roommates on the Friday night. We built a couple of multiplayer games that we're showcasing here using the Google Assistant. The first one is a trivia game called Are You Feeling Lucky? And this is an experience that's available on all Google Assistant surfaces, but it's best played on the Home Hub, which we launched last year with the visual display. And in this trivia game, you have the Google Assistant asking the users questions and acting as a game show host, and you have this back and forth interaction. And of course, we also have a classic game, Mad Libs, that's also available on the Google Assistant. So again, fairly new industry. There is a lot of trial and error, and there is a lot of growing pains that came about when we were trying to design these games. There aren't a lot of voice games out there still, and so we wanted to share some of the tips and tricks that we learned while we were developing these games so that you can take these learnings home and try to build your own exciting voice games. So as with any game, you first want to think about what the core mechanic of your game is. Simply put, what kind of game are you building? But when you have your voice as the controller and the feedback being audio only, this can be pretty tricky and pretty challenging. So for example, games like trivia and quizzes are a little bit more intuitive to build for voice because there's less information that users need to retain while they're playing these games. So with Are You Feeling Lucky, the trivia game where you have the Google Assistant playing as the host, the only information that the users really need to retain in this back and forth exchange is probably just a question and maybe the answer options. The progression is linear. We're not really introducing a lot of complex characters. We don't really have crazy worlds that you're exploring, which makes it really easy for players to track even without visuals. On the other hand, when you're trying to build a game like, let's say, chess, where it's very visual when you want to track all the pieces, or an RPG, you might have a lot of characters, and those characters might have stats, and you might have all these different worlds that you're exploring and all these objects that you're interacting with, which makes it a little bit trickier when players don't have a visual reference in front of them. I'm not discouraging you from designing these types of games. I'm just saying that it could be a little bit more challenging without maybe asking the players to take notes along the way. Setting the stage or the narrative plays a really crucial part in any game, but there's another layer to this challenge when you're designing a voice game, and that's figuring out what role the narrator plays in your game. So when I mentioned the trivia game, again, we have this game show host type of game, and the Google Assistant is your game show host. Inversely, if you have a game like a Halloween-themed game, then maybe your narrator is a ghost or a zombie. If you have a Christmas game, maybe it's Santa Claus. Either way, you have this character who is driving the narrative of your game, and this is the character that the players are going to be interacting with throughout the game. This is the character that will be leading you and revealing plot points in the game. And identifying who this narrator is and giving this narrator a character will be the key to building a really cohesive world for your audio game. The third tip is, now that you have the world and the character that drives it, you want to start writing the script or the dialogue that the characters and the players will be reciting back and forth. As I mentioned earlier, because the player input is voice and the output is audio, the key to writing a successful dialogue is keeping it simple so that players can retain all that information and keep track of the game. The best way for you to tell if a game is too complex is by prototyping by role-playing. So you can ask someone to sit down and read the lines of the narrator, and the player can try to respond naturally as they can to see if there are any holes in your script or your dialogue. If you see that the player is getting stuck in parts of the game, you can tell that maybe your game is too complex and that the dialogue is not quite written well as you like it to be. So at this point in your voice game, the only thing you have is dialogue, which is a little bit dull. So we want to be adding a little bit more richness into your game. And you can really accomplish this, of course, because it's an audio game by sound design. And we split this up into two different categories. One is background music, and this could be a musical track, or it could be something that's more ambient. So for example, if you have your Halloween game, maybe it's just wind or water or something of that sort. And then you also have sound effects. So now you want to be adding the rustling leaves and things like that. You could also use the sound effects to not only identify objects that are in your game, but also use them as player cues as well. By itself, again, the dialogue could feel really dull, so you want to be adding these layers in to add a lot more richness into the world that you're building. And last but not least is tip number 5. Make sure you don't lose track of the bigger picture. As a game designer, this is something that I can get stuck with. When I'm really hyper-focused on the details, sometimes I forget to take a step back. But really, you want to be looking at the bigger picture of your audio game. Some of you may be familiar with this chart. This is the player interest curve, and this is a reference that game designers use to ensure that players stay engaged from beginning to end of a game. So when you first enter the game, you have kind of a really fun introduction that gets players hooked in your game. And of course, you want to make sure that players end on a high note so that they feel like there was a payoff at the end and that they didn't waste time investing in this game. The difficult part is making sure that the players are engaged in the middle portion of your game. So you can't just have a really great beginning and then just flatten out. Of course, you want to make sure that the player engagement is on an upward trajectory until they reach the payoff. Something that's challenging in voice games are errors. So the thing about using your voice as a controller is that players can really say anything. Some examples of how this might happen is you might have a true or false question in a trivia game, and they might say something that's completely off the rails. You want to be thinking about all these different edge cases and be able to design around them. And sometimes it's not even the player's fault. Sometimes they might be trying to test all the different edge cases in the game, but really it could be that there's too much background noise. And if the game is taking in all this other audio, you want to think about what this user experience is. I find it pretty frustrating when the Google Assistant says, I didn't catch that, or I don't understand. So we want to minimize this disruption if anything like this happens. We need to design around this to make sure that players stay engaged throughout the game, like I showed you in the player interest curve. So to recap, here are the 5 design tips I walked you through today. The first one was defining the core mechanic of the game, and I brought up 2 examples of games, so trivia games and maybe an RPG. Think about how challenging your game is to device on this voice platform. The second one is setting the stage or identifying who the narrator of your voice game is. The third one is writing a dialogue between the Google Assistant or the narrator and the players. And you want to be prototyping by role-playing to make sure there aren't any holes in your script. The fourth one is layering in sound design to the dialogue with background music and sound effects. And lastly, we want to make sure as designers that we're keeping an eye on the bigger picture to ensure that users stay engaged throughout the game. So now that you have some tips that you can start off with, you can design your own voice games using something called Actions on Google. You can follow this link and also find more resources that you can use to kickstart your voice game. Next, we're going to switch gears, and Stuart's going to share how you can grow with Firebase.
I'm Stuart Miles, and I'm a lead on the Firebase for Games team. And I'm here to talk about growing your game with Firebase. So what is Firebase? Hands up, anyone know what Firebase is in the room? Oh, wow, we've got a lot of Firebase users in here. That's really awesome. So Firebase is a mobile development platform from Google that extends Google Cloud Platform. Firebase products are designed so that you do not need a custom server between your game clients and Google Cloud. So you can build many connected games primarily by writing client-side code. It's pretty cool. We have 1.5 million monthly active apps currently using Firebase. And this includes everything from small one-person startups all the way up to massive enterprises. They're all relying on Firebase to just make their lives a lot easier. And this also includes game developers, so thank you to all the game developers, including you guys in this room, for taking that journey with us. So Firebase supports iOS, Android, and the web, and we also provide admin SDKs for your servers. I'll walk you through how Firebase can help along with each step of the game development process using our demo game called Mecha Hamster. So we wanted to just build like a really, really simple game where the player navigates mazes with a hamster ball. They start at a starting point. They try and navigate through some traps and things like that, and they get to the end. After we had a rough idea for the design, we decided to start building the game. So we chose the Unity SDK, and Unity is the engine as a whole to develop the game. However, Firebase integrates easily into iOS or Android games, whether you're a C++ developer and you've got a C++ engine or Unity. As of today, also, if you're a C++ developer, we've open sourced our C++ SDK, so you'll have the option to integrate that into your games. This provides visibility into your code, enables control over fixes and improvements, and allows you to port functionality to new platforms as well. So we wanted players in our game to be able to create new content just like game designers. So we started off by building a level editor in the game that enables you to design maps, and it just saved data to local storage. This was great, but it didn't enable us to have data shared between players when we deploy the game. So we decided to use the Firebase real-time database to store the map data. Since the real-time database can also notify clients when data changes, it would be possible for us to add collaborative editing features like Google Docs in future. So next we configured our Firebase project in Unity. We navigated to a web browser, went to the Firebase console, created a project, and a few seconds later, we added the Unity app to the project. You can add multiple apps to a project, allowing multiple SKUs of a game to share the same game data. We wanted to target iOS and Android, so we registered an app for both platforms really easily. Downloaded the configuration files, downloaded the SDK, and then imported the SDK, the Firebase real-time database plugin, into our Mecha Hamster project in Unity. Here are the files coming in. And then we added the config files to associate the Unity project with the Firebase project that we'd set up in the web console earlier. So not that many steps to get to that point. We then wrote some code to store a map representation in JSON so that we can then upload that into the real-time database. The data was then immediately visible in the Firebase console, as you can see here. At this point, it was possible for game designers to author new maps and ship those to users without republishing the game. We then used Firebase's rules system to protect access to the map data. This prevented players from writing to designer-created maps without building a custom game server. We didn't have to put a server between Firebase's backend and each game client. As I mentioned before, Firebase's real-time database can be monitored by clients, so it's possible to build asynchronous multiplayer games using this scheme. But if you're going to build a real-time multiplayer game like a MOBA, please build your own game server. And then obviously we wanted to be able to associate user data with user accounts. So, in this case, we're really interested in users being able to share maps. So we had users sign in at the start of the game. Having users sign in immediately also enabled us to add other player data like high scores and things like that without adding friction later on in the game. So handling user sign-in yourself can be a lot of work. So we use Firebase authentication for sign-in. Authentication supports a range of built-in identity providers, including email and things like that. And now, as of a few days ago, we added support for Game Center on iOS in our gaming SDKs. So if we wanted to add other providers later, we could also use custom identity providers. So you could integrate any identity provider that you could think of just with a little bit of work. So once a player was logged in, it was possible to add support for players to create maps and share maps. Then we had a way to store, we had a way to associate data with players. So we built a leaderboard where players could also post high scores. We ended up using Firebase's open source Unity leaderboard API to add leaderboards in the game. It's an open source project that you can grab from our website. All we had to do was import the Unity plugin into our project, and then we could start posting scores. It was really easy. So since the Unity plugin was open source, we also extended it to support replays. So in this case, we've got a really bad player who just sits off to one side of the screen, and we've got the replay happening from the last high score that happened in the game. So if you've got stuff like where users are posting data and things like that, you likely want to be able to clean it up or potentially run some server-side action in response to what a player is doing. So in this case, Firebase integrates with Google Cloud Functions, and we use this to clean up old high scores, old replays, and things like that. We could also, do things like potentially validate whether or not a user's cheating, or like handle purchases and things like that if we wanted to, all using Cloud Functions. So we wanted to make sure our game would work across a whole range of devices when it shipped. Testing across a huge number of devices, like Android and OS devices, is a lot of work for a small team, especially when the game is changing rapidly. So we decided to use Firebase Test Lab to run our game on physical Android and iOS devices connected to machines in Google's data centers. Initially, we didn't write any test code. We just uploaded the game and let Test Lab's Robo or Monkey Tester randomly tap the screen in an attempt to crash the game. So a typical monkey tester will just randomly tap the screen. In the case of RoboTest, it will actually identify Android UI elements and tap those. But now we have AI-assisted actions. And so this will actually use computer vision to determine where the UI elements are in the game. So you can see this, on the left screen, you can see random pressing all over the place. That's our old system. And on the right screen, you can see it got into the game really quickly. This was the AI-assisted monkey tester, and it went through and navigated our UI really quickly. It's pretty awesome. Since we had confidence our game was going to work, we published it to the App Store and Google Play. We wanted to improve the game, so we needed a way to determine if anyone was playing and whether they would continue to play. So since we'd built with Firebase, we already had Google Analytics integrated for Firebase. And Google Analytics provides a range of metrics simply by initializing the library out of the box, just with a couple of lines of code. This data is easily available in the Firebase console. So we could see how long players were continuing to play our game, where players are, what platforms they're using, demographics, operating systems that they're working on, and even interests. So Google Analytics will collect all of the data. It's a great way of getting data ingested, and Firebase Console provides like that easy view into your data. But once it's integrated, because we're connected with Google Cloud, all of this data can be then streamed into BigQuery. So we could use BigQuery to do some basic analysis of the data. So this is a really simple example. We wrote some SQL to just look at, based upon which operating system, the total number of users per operating system. And we ended up with results segmented by country. It's pretty easy. Getting stuff into BigQuery is great because then you can start processing potentially petabytes of data. You can train machine learning models, and you can do so much more. There's so many options with this. You can even pull in data from other data sources that you have as well outside of Firebase. So what if you find out your game is losing players? Perhaps players are reporting problems via negative reviews. How do you determine what is going wrong in the field? Well, we released Firebase Crash Analytics recently to monitor crashes in our game. Each crash report is visible in the Firebase console, along with incident rate. There, you can also see breakdowns on the type of crashes people are seeing. And you can even see stack traces that showed you exactly where in your code the crash is occurring. So Crash Analytics data is also available in BigQuery. So it's possible to take tasks like determining whether crashes are happening to high value or low value users, and balancing that against the cost of fixing a bug, to determine whether it's easier to just unpublish a game for a specific device or put all the effort in to fix the problem. So we wanted to improve our game, so we needed more players to gather more data. We needed people to be more engaged. So, we had this theory that a lot of players would stop playing because they'd played through all of the maps in the game. So we integrated Firebase Cloud Messaging so that we could re-engage our players using notifications. So when we publish a new map, we would be able to send push notifications to users so that they could come back into the game. So you can do this for any aspect of your game at all, like new modes, friends coming online. There's plenty of use cases. So in the case of integrating cloud messaging, you could just compose a notification in the console, select a specific set of users. In this case, we sent it to everyone. The player would then see a system notification, and if they tap on that, it would take them to the content in the game. So new content, like I said, can really be anything. It could be a time-limited offer for in-game currency, anything at all. So in cases when players uninstall the game, if we actually have their email address or we have some access to them via social media, we could actually send a dynamic link to them that would take them straight into the game. So when a user opens a Firebase dynamic link, it takes them all the way through app installation and will then take them directly into the game without them having to go back and find the link again. Since we have Google Analytics integrated, we're then able to run experiments or A/B tests on players by pushing new configuration to the game just using Firebase Remote Config. Firebase Remote Config simply stores key value pairs so that they can contain any data at all. So for example, we could update game balance for all users to make the game easier, or just for users who are having trouble completing the first few maps of the game. Also, since we integrated Google Analytics with Firebase, it was possible to see conversions from ads automatically without integrating a new SDK. This also made it possible to target player audiences in Google Analytics. So if you're not building a demo, you probably want to get paid for your hard work. Okay. So if you want to figure out when to show in-game offers, ads, or organize your store to maximize the chance a player will generate revenue, it can be pretty hard. So if you're already using Google Analytics, it's possible to enable a product we have called Firebase Predictions. It's a single click in the console. And that identifies players who are likely to churn or spend in your game. This can be used as a guide to run experiments and maximize revenue. So for example, Rockbite Games use predictions to segment their players into groups based upon their chance of spending or not spending. They then used Firebase Remote Config to change their in-app store differently for players who are likely to spend versus not spend. They discovered players in the likely to spend group made more in-app purchases if chests were featured at the top of the store. This gave Rockbite also gave users in the unlikely to spend segment the option of viewing an ad to get in-game currency. Firebase as a whole helped Rockbite boost revenue by 25%. Half-Brick Games also used Firebase to increase revenue. They constructed an experiment where they gifted users credits. The control group received no credits. One group received credits at level 3. Third group received credits when they were in the wheel churn segment. Users in the wheel churn test group had a 20% increase in 7-day retention versus the other segments. So it's possible to leverage the power of machine learning easily to build in-app purchase flows and ad experiences with Firebase predictions. Now, if you don't want to customize things, it's possible to just turn on AdMob smart segmentation if you've got AdMob integrated into your game. This will automatically show ads to players who are predicted to not spend, and not show ads to players and show ads to players who are predicted to not spend, and not show ads to players who are predicted to spend. So AdMob also does all of the A/B testing automatically for you. It's really easy to integrate and use. So if you want to learn more about Firebase at GDC, We've got a deep dive into Google Cloud Platform and Firebase on Wednesday. There's actually an entire day dedicated to Google Cloud Platform on Wednesday. We're also speaking at the Google Expo booth at Wednesday at 11:30, and we'll be covering how to use Firebase data to optimize games. And on Thursday at 2 p.m., we'll be covering more Firebase features in Mecha Hamster. Okay.